Well, thanks everyone for coming out. I'm super excited to get to talk with you and share a little bit about some of the fun things that I get to do. I'm going to start out showing you my favorite meme, astronauts, because everyone doesn't get to be a marine biologist when they grow up. Now, I actually use this to advertise my marine biology class that I teach here at TEDxLaSierraUniversity, and I want to thank Alan Thayer and the folks at Southern Fried Science for creating this. It's drawn students into my class, because I think a lot of people can relate to this. When you're young, and I'm definitely one of these people, you were super excited about space, and you wanted to be an astronaut because you get to do the things. You go and explore. You get to be on a spaceship out into space. You get to wear the costume and the outfit and do all the things and go where no one's gone before. Life took me in a different direction. Instead of focusing on outer space, my life is focused on inner space. And I would argue I get to explore and do all the fun things too, and I don't have to leave the planet to do it. So today I'm going to take you on a tour of the lungs of our planet and show you some of the weird alien-looking, but not actual alien creatures that live in those lungs. So we live on the blue planet, not a green planet. It gets the title because 70% of the surface of the Earth is covered with water. I find it ironic that I have to call myself a marine biologist because most of the planet is my biology. I think everybody else should be called terrestrial biologists. Often when we think of marine biology, most people get drawn to it thinking, I'm going to play with dolphins and swim with them and train them. And if I'm honest, that might have been in my head a little bit when I started down my path, right? And for a few scientists, this is a great area of research studying dolphin behavior and dolphin ecology. A lot of other times when we think about being a marine biologist, we think about slapping on a scuba tank, going to tropical islands and getting to go scuba diving with all the coral and all the fish. And for some marine biologists, that's a great job too. But there's so much more ocean than just that bit where the dolphins and the coral live. Right? If we take a look at this slide that's up on the screen here, you can see the average depth of the Earth's ocean is almost 2 miles, right? Or 2 miles. It's 12,000 feet or a little bit more than 3,500 meters deep. The dolphins and the corals are up in like that top 100 meters, maybe 200 meters. That's just that little half inch on this chart. But then as we go deeper, there's all kinds of things to see, right? We've got the epipelagic, which is 0 to 200 meters, and there's tons of zooplankton and cool animals and whales and things that live there. As we go deeper, it gets a little darker, and it gets a little colder, and we're into the mesopelagic. And there's a lot of weird-looking squid and fish and other zooplankton that hang out there. All the way down to the deepest, right, our bathypelagic, down Marianas Trench, deepest place on the planet, it's 36,000 feet deep. Like, let that sink in. 5 miles under the ocean, there's life down there too. So while the coral reefs are cool and the dolphins are cool, there's a whole other world to explore. And I'm going to take you on an adventure and show you some of the animals that live there. So instead of hopping on a spaceship, I get to hop on an oceanographic ship, cruise out into the middle of the ocean. And you notice this doesn't look like a normal ship, doesn't look like a cruise ship. Although it does have cabins and really good food, we've kind of designed the ship so the back end, we can do all kinds of work. So you see there's like a little square thing hanging on the back end. That's the A-frame. We deploy nets and all other kinds of probes to tell us what's going on in the water off the back of that. And you can kind of see a crane that's going up and over the ship right now. That was actually up when we took this picture because they were deploying an autonomous vehicle into the water. So the ship is purposely designed, and I also want to point out the name of the ship. The previous ship I failed to mention was the RV Atlantic Explorer, and that's out of the Bermuda Institute of Oceanographic Sciences and Arizona State University School of Global Sciences. But this is a Sally Ride. This is right here in California. You can go visit this down in San Diego. It's at dock at Scripps quite often. And notice Sally Ride, astronaut, if you're not familiar with her name. So it's named after someone that was a part of the space program. So instead of putting on spacesuits, we get to go on these ships with some of our science friends and chuck on our special suits. Whenever you go out on a research ship, if you haven't been on one recently, they make you put on these little survival suits on the very rare chance that there's a problem and we have to jump in the water and swim away. We don't wear them other than the first 5 minutes of the boat that we're on the boat. Once we get out in the ocean, we start deploying our toys to collect the animals. This particular toy is a net that I use. So most of the animals that I work with, I call them the squishies of the ocean. You can kind of divide invertebrates, so animals that don't have a backbone, into squishies and crunchies. Crunchies would be like the lobsters. Squishies are like the jellyfish things. So I study the squishies, which is great, but they're super fragile. When you catch them in a net, if the net has too big a hole, the squishies go right through it, or they get beaten up by the net. So I have this specially designed net. It's basically about the size, the opening is about the size of a hula hoop, so it's about a 1 meter net. Tapers back about 20 feet, and then you'll notice there's like a bucket on the deck. That bucket is called the cod end. That's where all the animals that I'm collecting ends up. Usually on most oceanographic nets, the cod end's about the size of a soda bottle. Everything goes in there and it dies, because most oceanographers don't care about the animals having to be alive. We just want to count them and see how many are there. But I'm a physiologist, so I need my animals alive and happy. So we deploy this particular net because it's gentle on the little squishies that come in. They hang out in the bucket. We deploy it off to the side down a wire. And I'll send it down however deep, depends on the animal that I'm looking for. 100 meters, 200 meters, 800 meters is kind of the lower limit for me. And then when we bring it up, we take the bucket inside and sit and stare at it for like an hour to 2 hours trying to find the things. I have spent more time in this position than I care to count. And it's great. It's very exciting. But the reason it takes so long is because this is what it looks like inside. And you're looking for little tiny clear animals, your particular subject animal. And everything's moving around and constantly in motion. And so you'll look for like 15 minutes. And you're like, oh, I was looking for, like for me, most of the time I'm looking for salps. There's no salps. And just when you're about to walk away, you see the shadow of something that looks like a salp. You're like, oh, let me keep looking. And before you know it, 2 or 3 hours have gone by, which is great. But we get to see a lot of cool animals, which is really exciting. I'm going to show you a few. I'm going to start with this jellyfish. I want to point out a few things as we go through the animals. You'll see a theme. Almost everything that I'm going to show you is either clear, red, or black, which is kind of interesting, right? If you live in the open ocean, or what we call the pelagic zone, there's no trees or bushes or rocks or mountains to hide behind if a predator is trying to eat you. You have to hide in plain sight. So most things that live in that midwater are either clear, red, or black. Clear makes sense. You're hiding in the water. We can see through. Things won't eat you. Black makes sense because you're in a dark, cold environment. You'll match the background. But red's a little weird. Usually when we think of red, we think of that as like an alerting color, right? That's why like fire engines are red or stop signs are red. But water has this unique property. It filters out light as light goes through the water column, and red's the first color that gets filtered out. It's actually gone after about 3 feet. This is why if you've ever gone snorkeling on vacation and brought a little disposable camera and you took pictures of the coral reef, everything looked blue, it's because all the red light is gone. So on this jellyfish, that red cross that you see in the middle, and it's so clear, this animal, you're looking straight down into the animal, that red cross are its gonads. And the opening down at the bottom is where the stinging cells are, but they've contracted those in. I collected this at about 500 meters. This next critter is one of my favorite. You can find these shallow. They come up to the surface, but they also go really deep. This is a pelagic snail, a swimming snail. It's called a heteropod. Common name is a sea elephant. So you notice there's a structure on the far side. That's its mouth, and it moves it just like a trunk. Right? Hence the name sea elephant. And then it's got these weird flashlight-looking structures. Those are its eyeballs, and they look just like flashlights. You can see its stomach in red in the middle. And then close to me in the bottom part of the screen, you can see a shell. So this is a swimming snail that's retained its shell. You can see a tuft of gills sticking out. That shell is super thin and really hard for this animal to make. It needs it to stay alive, but because we're changing the pH of the ocean by adding so much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, some of these animals aren't able to make that shell as well, so they're getting endangered by some of the pollution we're putting up. Notice the wings on the top. Those aren't actually wings. They're a modified foot, and they flap it like a wing. So really, if you think about this as being a snail, this animal's upside down. If we flipped it over, the shell would be on top, the foot would be on the bottom. This is about the size of your index finger. This, again, was one of my favorite ones. I've only seen a small handful of these. So this is a larval anglerfish. So some of you, I think, might be familiar with anglerfish. They're the ones that have the little antenna-looking thing sticking off their head that makes light and does bioluminescence. This was about the size of your pinky nail. It's super transparent, which is really cool. And if you look hard, you can kind of see its gills in the middle, and you can actually see blood flowing through it and changing color as it gets oxygenated, which is really neat. I just love this squid. It was very photogenic. It's from genus Plankoteuthis. I collected this in the Gulf of California at about 1,000 meters depth. It's about the size of your index finger. But what I love is those yellows and those reds and those oranges, again, kind of in that same red spectrum to help it hide. Those colors that you're seeing are on a structure called a chromatophore. Chromatophores are very much like the pixels on your television. They can use nerves to contract muscles on those chromatophores and make them shrink and disappear, so the animal will be completely clear. Or they can relax or change their muscles tension, and it opens it up, so then we can see the color disc. Now, you're probably familiar in seeing that with octopus. Octopus, particularly shallow water species, do have a ton of chromatophores, and they color change and match their environment really well. This lives in the dark, so it's kind of weird that it has all these, and we think that they're actually using their chromatophores for intraspecific communication, so they're trying to communicate with each other by changing color a little bit. This worm I just love. It just looks weird. It's called a balloon worm, it's a common name. It's a polychaete, but the thing that's really interesting to me, or for me about this, if you look at the mouth structure, you notice there's like a little green, hint of green on those little tentacles sticking out. When this thing was alive and happy and swimming in the bucket, the whole thing was that color. It was like a bright highlighter. I'd never seen anything like it. The reason it's green is because of its blood. So your blood is red because you have hemoglobin. This has green blood called chloroquine. And it feeds, really interesting, it makes this big mucus net. And marine snow and particulate just kind of falls into the net. It'll then eat that net and keep on swimming. So really cool worm, and again, about half the size of your pinky. So again, small critter. This looks like an insect that you could find right outside. It is not an insect outright. It's an amphipod. I collected this pretty deep. This is about 1,500 meters down, again in the Gulf of California. It's a part of a group of amphipods that we call hyperiid amphipods. Most hyperiid amphipods have big compound eyes that cover their head. This one doesn't. Now you notice it looks like there's two eyes kind of on the left-hand side there. Those aren't truly eyes. Those are reflective cones that will reflect the light to its photoreceptor cells. And this animal doesn't see all the colors. It's really good at seeing green. And the reason it's really good at seeing green, most things in the ocean that make light, they do bioluminescence. Most things in the deep sea make green light. Maybe if you've ever seen a firefly with that green butt flashing, same enzymes are used for that in the deep sea. Luciferase does it. So this animal, when it's looking for prey, it's looking for that green light. These are so cool. This is another hyperiid amphipod. This one is probably about, again, half the size of your pinky, maybe even a little bit smaller. And it looks like it's got that barrel. That barrel is not part of this animal. That barrel used to be a salp, which I'm going to show you a picture of in a few minutes. It killed the salp, tore out his body parts, grabbed onto what we call the test, and it lives in there, and it's going to lay its eggs in there. If this animal looks slightly familiar to you because you're into science fiction and you've watched a movie about aliens that happens to have a queen alien in it, the queen alien was based on this particular critter. Copepods, you have all seen a copepod, and if you've swum in the ocean and got salt water in your mouth, you probably ate a few. They're really small. This is about a 1 millimeter bug. It looks like a swimming lobster, and they're the kind of like the link between phytoplankton, our primary producers, and the rest of the food chain. These eat single-cell algae. Again, notice the pink color on this one. Those are its gonads, and that pink is still there for camouflage. This particular one actually lives deep, so it's going to feed on other things than just phytoplankton. And some of them that fall into the group called calanus copepods have this really unique ability. When a predator comes and tries to grab them, they squirt bioluminescent light out their butt and swim in the other direction. On this next slide, pay attention. Watch the forceps. Reach in and touch the water, and a little green flash of light. But this animal, so this is the animal that I spent a lot of my time doing research on. This is called a salp. Now, for those of you who are into biology, you might know what a phylum is. We kind of organize animals into phylums based on their body plan. When we look at this, a lot of times we consider this to be jellyfish-like. It's clear, kind of looks like a jellyfish. And historically, some scientists kind of did group them in terms of their biology, not in terms of their classification as jellyfish, and consider them part of that gelatinous zooplankton. But this is actually the same phylum that you're in. This is a chordate. Right? So during a larval stage, it has all the features of a chordate. They swim in a very unique way. They don't beat their tail. They suck water in their mouth, and they blow it out their back end and swim like a jet. And in the process of doing that, they have a modified pharynx that has a mucus net tapered down. As water is flowing through them, that mucus net collects algae that's in the water, and they digest it, make these really dense fecal pellets, which I'm going to talk about more. They also have really weird sex. Salps alternate or have an alternation of generations. So this one we would call a nurse or oozoid. You notice there's like a clear streak that's getting bigger and bigger and bigger across the bottom. Those are actually clones that it's releasing. When the clones come out, different species have different arrangements of them, but they don't look like the nurse. Here's a series of clones. You see each of those balls, those are not individual clones. Each ball has 13 clones on it. They're connected, almost like the spoke of a bicycle wheel, and there's a core hub in the middle. They filter feed just like the rest of the nurses, and they take big poops. And when I say they take big poops, this is what's important. Here's the fecal pellet. Not only is it big compared to its competitor, the copepod, and if you notice, just to the side, there's a copepod. So it literally poops bigger than its nearest competitor, both in size and numbers. But it's square, which, how cool is that? Not too many animals make a square fecal pellet. But here's why that's exciting. That square fecal pellet's very dense, and it rockets to the bottom of the ocean. Things like krill that eat phytoplankton, their fecal pellets are more like your hair. That doesn't sink very quickly. Or copepods, they make a little oval fecal pellet. That doesn't sink very quickly either. The reason we're interested in the sinking is those fecal pellets are functionally carbon. And when it sinks to the deep ocean, we're fixing it into the deep ocean. So here is just kind of like a diagram of what we call the carbon cycle. So CO2 in the atmosphere goes into the ocean. Phytoplankton absorbs that, doing photosynthesis, makes it part of itself, makes sugars to construct itself. Zooplankton and other things will eat that phytoplankton. They'll poop it out, goes to the bottom of the ocean. Phytoplankton also dies naturally, will aggregate, fall to the bottom of the ocean. Some of the phytoplankton stays in the midwater, and there's a whole microbial loop that involves bacteria and viruses. So they've got all this carbon moving different ways, and these things are also respiring, so sometimes the ocean will release CO2 back out, too. Super important to understand, and this is the part when I mentioned that we talk about the lungs of the ocean. If you enjoy breathing, we want a healthy ocean, because 1/3 of the oxygen that you're currently breathing came out of it. It also absorbs the CO2 that we're putting up in the atmosphere. Important to know where that carbon is going so we can understand how much carbon the ocean can actually absorb. Besides just having carbon and poop falling, another weird thing or unique thing that salps participate and a lot of other zooplankton participate in is the largest migration that happens on the planet, and it happens every single day. They vertically migrate. So when it's dark, we go up to the surface and we feed because that's where all the food is. And then when the sun comes out, it's like, holy cow, everything can see me and something's gonna eat me, so we go deep. Where it's dark and it's cold, our metabolic rate slows down because it's cold. We're not feeding as much and we're not pooping as much. So why I study salps and their metabolic rate and their fecal pellet production is we're trying to understand how much do they actually poop. Salps are really hard to work with. There's not a whole lot of data on their metabolism. So one of the things that I study, or I've been studying for the last several years, is how does temperature affect their metabolic rate? So I hop on the boats, collect the salp, and in particular, I've been working with Salp fusiformis, get its metabolic rate at the surface temperature, and then also calculate its metabolic rate that it would be at the lower end of its daily vertical migration. And when I've done that, I found that they actually slow their metabolic rate by almost fourfold, about 3.5 to nearly 4, we're on the bottom end of their daily vertical migration. So that means for 12 hours, their metabolic rate is decreased by an order of 4. When I integrate that into older carbon models or previous carbon models that didn't have a whole lot of salp data in them in terms of temperature effect, we find that for Salp fusiformis, we've overestimated how much carbon it's depositing by about 27%. When we then take that same value and expand it out to all the species of salps that vertically migrate, it shows that our carbon budget is off by about 10% in the wrong direction. They're not exporting as much as we thought. Which you might think that's not a big deal, but when we think about carbon, size of the ocean, and gigatons, that's a big error. So now I'm going out and hopping on every ship I can get my hands on with any scientist who will let me tag along to grab as many different species of salps so I can see if that same trend exists in all of them, if we see that same order of magnitude change with the temperature effect. So for you folks, I got to show you a little bit of these alien species and talk briefly about my research, and it's like, all right, thanks for sharing, but why do we care? But here's the deal, here's why you should care. We're dumping CO2 up in the atmosphere, and that CO2 is increasing. It's been increasing since the Industrial Revolution. I think right now we're at something like 460 parts PPT, parts per thousand, I think. That CO2 is causing the planet's climate to change. That change in temperatures on the planet is also changing the ocean currents. If you enjoy a healthy, happy ocean, you enjoy a happy ocean that has good, stable currents. We're breathing oxygen that depends on living oceans. As climate change is happening, these currents are changing. We're getting a change in how the animals are behaving. We're getting a change in what we call the nutrient cycle, so how things like phosphorus, et cetera, nitrates are getting moved through the water column. We're getting change in what we call the biological pump. The biological pump is just movement of nutrients through the water from zooplankton. We're getting a change in the carbon cycle. If you want to have a happy, healthy planet, you need to have happy, healthy ocean, and you need to have happy, healthy animals in it. So it's important that we study these animals so that we can understand how climate change and ocean acidification from the CO2 going into it and CO2 is affecting these animals. Now, you might not be as excited about that, but maybe you're like, man, these animals are cool and I want to know more about them, but I don't have access to a ship or a net. You don't necessarily have to go out to the middle of the ocean to see some of these weird critters. So you notice this picture here. That's my Uncle Randy's hand, and he is holding a phrenemia that he found on the beach in Maine. So you can find these deep, and when they do their vertical migration, come shallow, if there's a storm at the right time, sometimes they get washed up on shore. Maybe you're super pumped and you're like, man, I want to see more of these, and I don't want to just occasionally see one on the beach. You can go out to any dock that's on the ocean in the middle of the night and hang a lantern on it and wait and see what shows up. This is one of my friends, Jamie Anderson. He lives up in the Puget Sound. All of these critters are ones that he photographed by just hanging out at a dock at 2 in the morning with a light. So if you're super excited about seeing the alien species that are actually from our planet and live in our oceans, just hang out by the ocean a little bit at night, and you never know what you're going to find. We live on a beautiful planet that has deep blue lungs. You don't have to leave the planet to be an explorer. Our oceans, inner space, are so diverse and full of life. If you come to the ocean with a curious mind, you will find that there are more curiosities there than anywhere else in the universe. There's a whole world to explore right in our oceans. You just need to look just below the surface. Thank you all for listening to my talk. I appreciate it. It was a lot of fun. Thank you.